Okay, let's unpack this. Picture a river, winding its way across the land.
Hmm.
It might look a bit random, all those twists and turns, but those curves, they actually follow these really crucial patterns.
Right. Vital for ecosystems, water quality.
And even preventing floods.
Yeah.
Yeah. But figuring out where these meandering rivers are actually heading next, that's traditionally been, well, pretty tough.
Oh, definitely. Time-consuming, expensive, the
Yes.
works.
Exactly.
But what's so cool is that these movements, they aren't random at all. It's physics, really.
A constant dance.
Yeah, a dance of erosion on one bank, deposition on the other.
Hmm.
And it's influenced by, plants holding the soil, how much sediment's in the water, the flow speed.
Uh-huh.
And as the water goes around a bend, there's this spiral flow, helical flow, pushes sediment inwards, makes the curve deeper.
You see that everywhere, right? Like those examples mentioned, Rio Mamor.
Yep, in Bolivia, that's a free-flowing one.
Right.
Or the White River in the U.S., that one's a bit more confined. It's a fundamental river process.
Yeah. Right. But predicting how all those factors interact over time, precisely, that's been the big challenge.
Hmm.
But here's where it gets really interesting. Scientists are looking at some seriously cutting-edge tools now.
AI, machine learning.
Exactly. Artificial intelligence, machine learning.
Hmm.
These could give us a much faster, maybe more complete way to understand these, dynamic river systems, maybe even forecast where they're going.
And if you think about the traditional methods,
Yeah.
they're valuable, absolutely, but they do have limits.
Like the numerical models.
Yeah, numerical solutions can be super accurate, but they need massive computing power, take ages.
Right.
Then you've got analytical solutions.
Yeah.
They're quicker, sure, but they often simplify things. Maybe too much for a complex real river.
Okay, so they're not quite capturing the full picture. So for this deep dive, we're jumping into a recent study that asked this really cool question. Can AI actually predict how fast simulated meandering rivers will, move?
I agree, yeah.
We've got the paper right here. Meanders on the move. Can AI-based solutions predict where they will be located?
Catchy title.
Isn't it? So our mission today is pretty straightforward. Understand how AI and machine learning are tackling this really complex natural thing.
And what that might mean for predicting river behavior down the line.
Exactly. Think of it like getting a shortcut to understanding this fascinating intersection of high-tech and, nature. So how do you even start teaching AI about something like a meandering river? It seems so complex.
That's a great question. The researchers here were pretty clever about it. Instead of modeling every single grain of sand,
Which would be impossible.
right, they used existing semi-analytical models. These are basically sophisticated math representations built on earlier research to simulate idealized meandering rivers,
Okay, so virtual rivers in a computer.
pretty much. And these models are good. They can realistically recreate different bend shapes and how they evolve over time. That's key for training the AI.
Gotcha. So they're building this virtual river lab. What are the key ingredients, the parameters they're tweaking in these simulations?
They focused on dimensionless parameters. It's like boiling the problem down to its core elements,
Scaling it down.
Exactly. 3 key ones were shield stress. Think of that as the river's power to move sediment around.
Okay.
Then relative roughness, how bumpy the riverbed is compared to how deep the water is. They use values like 0.1 and 0.01 for that.
Pretty standard values.
Yeah, fairly typical. And then the channels shape the ratio of its half width to its depth. They varied that quite a bit, from 10 to 50, to cover different kinds of rivers and flows.
Okay, so simulating different river types. And this model, can it handle things like when a river loop gets cut off, oxbow lakes?
It can, yeah.
Yeah.
It's designed to capture those natural processes like cutoffs and even tell the difference between landforms on the floodplain.
Wow, okay. That level of detail in the simulation data must be crucial for training a decent AI.
Absolutely. You need good training data.
So they've got their simulated river data. How do they actually teach the AI to predict the movement? What kind of machine learning tools did they use?
They tried out a few different ones. There was a multi-layer Perceptron, or MLP, that's a kind of artificial neural network.
Right.
Then extreme gradient boost, XGBoost, which is often really good with complex data.
Heard of that one.
Also a gradient boosting regressor, GBR, and just a basic decision tree, DT.
Artificial neural networks.
That still sounds pretty complex. Can you break that down just a bit?
Well, basically, they're computer systems kind of inspired by how our brains work. They learn patterns from data without you having to write explicit rules for every single scenario.
Like a network of connections.
Yeah, interconnected nodes passing information. They adjust the connections as they learn.
So instead of programming if curve sharp, then erode faster,
Mm.
the AI figures that relationship out by itself just by looking at the data.
Precisely. And, one way to picture how some of these models, like the decision tree, work is imagine a flowchart.
A series of yes-no questions. Is the curve sharper than this? Is the flow faster than that? Each answer leads you down a branch until you get a prediction.
Oh, okay, that makes sense. So what specific data did they feed these models? What were the inputs used to predict the output?
They use details about the river's shape at one point in time. Things like the XY coordinates along the center line, this intrinsic coordinate S that follows the river's path.
Like mile markers along the river?
Sort of, yeah.
Yeah.
Also, the river's angle at each point, theta, its curvature, and something called the excess near-bank velocity.
Okay. And the goal was to predict.
The near-bank velocity in the next time step.
And why focus specifically on that near bank velocity?
Because that's a key driver of the migration. Faster flow near the bank means more erosion.
Right, makes sense.
So predicting that velocity is like a critical step towards predicting the actual movement. And they were careful too. They checked that the inputs were actually related to the output. Used a correlation matrix, to see which inputs mattered most for predicting that velocity.
Smart. Don't want garbage in, garbage out. Okay, so the AI models are trained on this simulated data. How do they make sure the models are actually, learning properly and not just memorizing the examples they saw?
Good point. That's where model training and evaluation come in. First, they have to tune the model's hyperparameters.
Settings for the learning process itself.
Exactly.
Right.
They use something called grid search to find the best combination for each AI model.
Mm-hmm.
Like for the MLP, they tried different activation functions, found TON worked best.
Okay.
And they mentioned using PAL-BFGs for training the MLP. That's like a smart optimization algorithm helping the network learn efficiently. And Friedman-C, for the decision trees, guides how it splits the data.
Right, fine-tuning the engine, basically.
Right.
And then how do they test if their tuned-up AI is actually any good at predicting?
They used a two-stage method. Trained the models on data from 2 simulated river center lines that had reached a steady state. After an initial settling period, of course.
Got it.
Then they split the data, 70% for training, the other 30% for testing and validation. That way they tested on data it's never seen before.
The real test.
Exactly. And to measure how well they did, they used standard metrics. Root mean square error, RMSE.
Lower is better.
Absolute error, MAE. Also lower is better. And the F1 score, where higher is better. These tell you how accurate the predictions are.
Okay, makes sense. So what did they find? Which AI model came out on top for predicting these virtual river movements?
Well, the results were pretty clear. They looked at how things like angle, curvature, and velocity were distributed, usually found a single peak.
Uh-huh.
And the correlations showed interesting stuff, like curvature having a negative correlation with near-bank velocity.
Mm-hmm.
But the big result, XGBoost generally won out.
XGBoost again?
Yeah. It had the lowest MAE, MSE, and RMSE, and a high R-squared value. Basically, it was the best at predicting that crucial near-bank velocity. The MLP, the neural network, it actually performed worst by these measures.
Interesting. So XGBoost is the star here. What makes it so effective for this kind of problem?
Well, XGBoost uses this technique called gradient boosting. It builds a whole team and ensemble of decision trees one after another.
Okay.
Each new tree tries to fix the mistakes the previous ones made. It's this step-by-step correction that lets it capture really complex patterns in the data.
Ah, I see.
Sure.
Like building on previous knowledge.
Exactly. Plus, it's usually pretty fast and has ways to avoid just memorizing the training data, which is called overfitting.
Right. Overfitting is bad. Okay, so XGBoost accurately predicted the near bank velocity. But how does that translate back to predicting the river's actual shape and location later on?
That's the crucial next step, the payoff. The researchers took those velocity predictions from the AI.
XGBoost, presumably.
Mostly, yeah, as it was the best. And they plugged those predictive velocities back into the original numerical equations that describe how the river channel shifts.
Ah, okay. Combining the AI prediction with the physics-based model.
Precisely. And doing that allowed them to generate predicted channel center lines over time.
And how did they look?
Really good, actually.
Yeah.
When they compared the AI predicted center lines with the actual simulated center lines, especially using XGBoost's predictions, the agreement was remarkably high.
Wow.
You could see it visually. The predicted path really hugged the simulated path,
Yeah.
at least in the confined meander reach they tested. They even calculated an RMSE of less than 0.1,
Which means?
which means something like 90% accuracy in
Yeah.
predicting where that center line would be. Pretty impressive.
That is impressive. So the AI isn't just number crunching, it's genuinely predicting the physical shape of this dynamic system with high accuracy. Were there any hiccups, any limitations?
Yeah, they noted some small differences, minor variations, between predicted and observed center lines in a few spots.
Okay.
They suggested it might be down to factors the idealized simulation didn't fully capture. Maybe, local differences in how tough the riverbank material is, or maybe the model struggles a bit with really, really sharp, complex bends.
Understandable. Real rivers are messy. So what's the big takeaway here? The bottom line.
I think the key message is that machine learning, and XGBoost in particular for this study, really shows significant promise. It looks like a powerful tool for efficiently and accurately predicting this complex river behavior.
Specifically the migration rates and how the shape evolves.
Exactly. That roughly 90% accuracy they got in predicting the center line, that hints at a potential shift in how we could manage rivers, forecast floods. It could be much faster, maybe cheaper than traditional ways.
And for you, the listener, this gives you a glimpse into how AI might provide a shortcut to understanding these incredibly complex natural systems. Real potential for better river management, flood prediction, protecting ecosystems.
Right. And they also use things like SHAP values.
Oh, yeah. What do those tell us?
They basically help you peek inside the AI's brain a bit. They show which input features like curvature or the river's angle the model found most important for its predictions and whether they push the prediction up or down. Sort of like knowing which factors a weather forecast relies on most.
Okay, understanding the why behind the prediction. Cool.
So it raises this final thought, maybe a bit provocative.
Mm.
Given how well this worked on simulated rivers, what happens when we try applying these AI techniques to real-world rivers?
Yeah, rivers out there in the wild.
Which are way less controlled, have even more complex factors flying around. What possibilities open up? What challenges might we hit?
It really makes you think about the bigger picture, AI helping us understand and maybe even manage the natural world better.
Absolutely. And things are moving so fast in AI. It's exciting to think about what kinds of insights, what kinds of predictions might become possible in the future for our dynamic planet.
Definitely something to keep an eye on, a fascinating look at where technology meets nature.